This video is sponsored by SimpliSafe. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. We recently got some really nice new lounge chairs for sitting by the pool. But we still need a table. These chairs are great, but they are kind of low to the ground, so I want to build a little table. Something that's pretty short, something that can survive outside, and most importantly, something that looks kind of cool. And honestly, that's where I have trouble a lot of time. I don't really think of myself as a designer. If it comes to making something work, I can probably figure it out. But if it comes to making something look interesting, that's honestly where I kind of have to lean on other people. I know that I want the table to be more interesting than just like a square or a rectangle. I need the shape to be different. I also think it needs to have some sort of pattern on it, and that's probably where I'm gonna have to get some help. I messed around with a bunch of different ideas, and I think I've got something, at least as far as the overall shape. The top of this thing is a hexagon, and then each side of the hexagon has a triangle that comes down and then would meet up with the point of another hexagon that's on the bottom that's turned at 30 degrees. Anyway, I think it looks kind of cool, but it needs a pattern. Now, like I said before, for me in design, it's kind of tough. I know what looks good, but I have a hard time creating a design or a pattern from scratch. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I think a lot of times as creative people, as makers, we feel like we have to do 100% of the process. But the truth is, we should lean on people who are better at things. So I just went looking for patterns, things that I liked that would work on this. And I found one on Etsy. Of course, you can buy handmade things on Etsy, but you can also buy digital files. In fact, we sell our digital plans there. You can buy design files, and they're actually pretty cheap. I found a collection of 65 decorative patterns for $6. And from looking through those 65, I found exactly the one that I wanted. Those files came in a bunch of different formats, and one of them was an SVG file, which I opened up in Illustrator and made some little adjustments to, and then I brought it into Fusion. I think that looks pretty cool. Now I just gotta go cut it out. To get this thing put together, we're gonna be using a really awesome tool, the xTool MetalFab. Now, this thing is a laser welder, it's a laser cleaner and a laser cutter in the form of handheld or the CNC. Previously, I've only used the CNC part to cut thin brass, and it worked super well. This was for a previous project, but today we're gonna use aluminum. And there's a couple reasons for that. One reason is I have several sheets of 1/8" aluminum on hand, but aluminum is also really good for outdoor projects. It doesn't rust, so I think it's gonna be actually really good in this case. But on top of that, I've had a historically hard time welding aluminum. I've tried TIG before, I was really terrible at it. I've tried MIG before, it didn't really work very well. And this thing actually has an aluminum setting, so theoretically it should be pretty easy to weld. But before we get to the welding part, we gotta do the cutting part. I mean, I've used this before. I know that it's good and can do really intricate cuts, but this blows my mind. This is 1/8" aluminum, and all of these cuts are super clean. There's not a bunch of slag sticking off the back of it. This thing is awesome. So these were like my test cuts, but it turns out they're totally usable. This is the top, obviously. I'll tell you about the hole later on. And then I've got the pieces that go up and the pieces that go down. I just need 5 more of each. This video is sponsored by SimpliSafe, who's been voted the best home security system for 5 years running, and honestly it makes sense because it's pretty great. It's also super easy to set up. Basically, you go to the SimpliSafe website and then you build out the system that you need for your home. Only the cameras and doorbells and sensors that you actually need, and then they show up at your house in a box. You can set up the entire system by yourself in about 30 minutes. It's very easy to do, and it's very easy to connect it to the app. And once you've got it connected to the app, you can look at all of your cameras, manage the entire system, and make any changes that you need to right from there. On top of that, they offer monitoring for about $1 a day, which is very inexpensive, but there's no long-term contract, so you can cancel it anytime you want to. And just in case, for some reason, you weren't happy with your system, you've got 60 days to return it and get all your money back. But I'm pretty sure that you're gonna keep it, because there's a huge peace of mind knowing that SimpliSafe is keeping an eye on your home and the things in it, as well as the people that you care about. But speaking of people, sometimes people show up that shouldn't be there, and SimpliSafe offers something called Active Guard. Now, this is a way for their monitoring agents to actually see through your outdoor cameras and identify a potential threat. They can talk to people through the cameras if they need to. They can turn on lights, set off sirens, and even call the police. But they do have an AI technology built in there to recognize friends and family and people who are supposed to be there. Overall, it's a great company, great technology, and it's a really affordable system, especially because if you go to simplysafe.com/ILTMS, you get 50% off your system. So be sure to go over and check them out. Build a system that works just for you. Huge thanks to SimpliSafe for sponsoring this video. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. The cutting is all done and it looks awesome, which I think speaks to how awesome a machine this is. And if you can find ways to build things that you can sell and make money, even an expensive tool like this can be profitable. But even if you don't invest in a tool like this, you can upload a file to one of the many services and have somebody cut this and send this to you. And then once you get those pieces in, you can weld them together with MIG or TIG or whatever you're comfortable with. I'm gonna use the MetalFab. Speaking of welding, check this out. Once you're finished doing the cutting operation, you just take the welding gun out so you can weld with it. Based on my previous aluminum welding experience, I'm gonna assume that everything is not gonna go to plan the first time. So I'm gonna use these scraps and actually do some test welds for once. Oh, that's bonkers. I've used this machine before, and so I know that it works, but it's still pretty mind-blowing because historically I've had a terrible time welding aluminum, but this is bonkers. Look at the seam in between these two pieces. This was literally me just pulling the trigger and letting the machine push the gun. It's crazy. So the fact that you can pull the trigger and it just moves the gun backwards as the wire feeds out is fantastic. It moves in a straight line, and that's great because all of the things that I have to weld together are a bunch of really long straight lines. Now the problem is gonna be, how do I hold these things in place so that I can weld them? Can't use magnets because it's aluminum. Ridiculous. Oh, it's so ridiculous. Now I've been at the welding for about maybe 30 minutes and it's ridiculously easy. I mean, I've only cut myself once, I'm super hot and sweaty, but the welding part is really simple. Of course, the next part may not be quite as simple. I've got to put one of these in between each one of these downward teeth, and they don't quite fit. I mean, technically they fit, but these pieces need to be bent out a little bit. I think I have an idea how to do that. So my plan is to lay this down flat on the table, and then kind of lay this thing over it and bend the pieces out to fit the edges. I think if I can get it all lined up, then I can just tack it in place. Unfortunately, all my welding is gonna have to happen on the inside of this table. Oh, that's actually perfect right there. Don't move, don't move. Now the inside was considerably harder than the outside, and that's mainly because the pieces weren't butted together in like a 90-degree joint. They were kind of thin edges at a weird angle and there wasn't a lot of material, but I got everything tacked together to where it's strong enough it's not gonna come apart. But next up, I'm gonna take it home and do the finish work on it because it's not 1,000 degrees there. I have quite a bit of grinding and smoothing and filing and stuff. There are some little areas where it blew out, and I think I'm probably gonna end up painting it. And I also wanna try to figure out a way to maybe braze or solder down in these joints to fill them in completely so that light doesn't leak out, because this thing's not just a table. Well, it's not sharp anymore, that's awesome. You can touch the whole thing without it cutting you. And even though it looks really cool with raw aluminum, we don't have any other fixtures or furniture that look like this around our backyard. So I think I'm gonna paint it, and that's actually helpful. Because these were all cut at right angles and then they were put together not at right angles, there's a tiny gap along all of these seams, which really honestly isn't a huge deal, but it will matter later on for something I haven't shown you yet. And since I'm gonna paint it, I don't have to fill these gaps with aluminum. I was gonna use a filler rod, but instead I can use something else. This is something I've never used before, but I'm gonna give it a shot. It's called Thixo, and it's an epoxy that's really thick that you can squirt into something, so it'd be great for putting in all these seams. After it cures up in a couple of hours, it's sandable and paintable, so I should be able to round over all these edges and then paint the whole thing a cool color. But like I said, I've never used it before, so wish me luck. It's totally gonna work. That was actually super easy, and that material is probably a little overkill for what I'm going for, but I know that I can sand and paint it, so now we just gotta wait for it to dry. We're gonna go bold with the color. So the paint turned out pretty cool, but we haven't talked about this. This is a solar lantern that I got off Amazon for about 12 bucks, and the hole in the top of the table is made to fit this. This part goes right here, charges throughout the day, and then when the sun goes down, it looks like this. My tendency is to focus on the function of something and not really pay attention to the form so much because I don't think of myself as a designer. And if you're like me, just work with an artist. Find somebody that fills the skill gaps that you have and it will make your projects better. I'm really happy that I did that because this thing looks awesome. Thanks for hanging out with me. Catch you next time. And bend out the 2 necessary pieces to feet into a seam or wherever, and it should cure. Of course it's gonna cure. But like I said, I've never used it before, so let's just go. I think this turned out super cool, and I'm really glad that